Okay, so that's recording. Okay, so I've just got obviously the earthquake model straight out of Zbrush.
Damn.
Yep. So we know these little power buttons give us the menu. So the first thing you want to do is just adjust the light. So by default, it's got this uniform light above it. So light. I don't do anything fancy with this, but basically if you just select the first one and move it, you can see how it's just repositioning your light. Pretty straightforward. Now the idea with this, and especially for your assignment, because I want a couple of renders, the idea is the renders is like it's meant to be like a pretty picture of some of your best work. It's not just purely showcasing what you've done. So you might want a picture like this that's just a screen grab in your document that says, okay, this is my sculpt that took 4 hours or whatever, and you talk a little bit about this. And that's just a screen grab. But then what you might want to do is go, well, for my presentation of the render, I'm going to zoom in on his belly. Pick a way to present it that's just something that just looks really cool. So it's the idea is that you've got a couple of pieces that are student portfolio worthy. Yeah. So it's not simply here's my character in an A pose. It's more just how cool is this? You know, I'm making some nice characters.
More for the appeal look, I guess.
Totally, yeah. Going for the appeal. It's like you're trying to impress a client that you're on track and you're awesome. So think about your framing. The way renderers work in Zbrush, because there's no real cameras, it's just what we're looking at here. The viewport is the document and it is the render. So if I were to output right now, just export, exactly what I see is what it's going to say, okay, your render's done. So you're picking your framing. It's all pretty low tech. You pick your framing and then in your light, you're just going to muck around. I've managed to invert that somehow. So just find something dramatic, not straight on. It's a bit fiddly, but you definitely want to get something a little bit more dramatic. Now at this point, you just want to export out this render. So, but first you want to increase the quality. So basically, when you go into the render menu, you've got preview mode, which is what we're working on. So preview mode lets you, orbit around real quick. And I'll just point out, you shouldn't do what I just did, which is move it. You've chosen your position. At this point, you can't touch the screen. So that's actually really critical. If you hit render and then you make even just the slightest move, the other renders won't work because what we're doing is multiple renders. So just to clarify, if I jump to Photoshop, all we're doing is outputting a beauty render and then a depth pass and then a shadow pass and then just compositing those together. So that's all it is. It's pretty low tech. But you can see, of course, they need to be the exact same camera angle. If there's slight movement, it's not going to work, which is no big deal. It just means you have to do it again. Okay. My zoom interface is just locked off my menu. Okay, there we go. Render, where are we? Render. So preview mode, you want to change it to best. And what it's going to do, you can see it's saying rendering with shadows. It's going to sit there and actually go through and do a render pass. Now, at the moment, it looks a bit janky and sort of scattered. And the reason for that is these settings here. So this is the render quality, and this is go and do a render. It's basically saying best quality render. So really what you want to do is increase this, but this will dramatically increase the time it takes to do that framing. So I'll increase that. 6 is getting a bit much for a quick demo, but I'll probably put it right up there to 6 or so. And so now if I press the button, it's going to think, and it'll probably take like a minute to go through, or 30 seconds, whatever it takes. It's going to take a little while to go through, which I won't do because you get the idea. So I've done that, and all that does is make this frame that we're looking at. It doesn't export out a file. It doesn't actually create a render view like you're used to in Maya. It's just made this screen. So what you need to do now, without touching the viewport and changing it, you need to export this document. And that's what our document's for. So document and export. And so that's going to export out a Photoshop file. And you need Photoshop for this process. So here's the one I did earlier. So just save it. I won't save this one. Again, without moving, now we come into render. And it's just a matter of choosing, oops. It's just a matter of choosing what sort of render pass we do. So BPR, this is best pass render. So that's, or best preview render. That's basically saying different versions of this sort of quality render. So it's based on this resolution setting here. And so what I want is the two main ones that I typically use would be a depth pass. It's always nice to have that option, and a shadow pass. You can experiment with the others. I find you don't really need a mask. The Magic Wand tool really does the job, but if you're more of a mask person, that's nice. I've seen people do some really cool stuff with ambient occlusion, but I don't really muck around with it too much. Honestly, if you're really wanting a good render, you don't do it in Zbrush. You do it in Maya or something. You know, this is just a good way to present your work. So all you do is click these two. So I'll click one, and it's just saying output, and you can see it's called the shadow. So there's the one I did earlier. And then when I click the next one, depth, does the same thing. So depth. And when I click it, it'll just save a Photoshop file in the background. You won't see anything change. And so that's basically it for ZBrush. That's rendered those images. And then to composite them, that's the finish. No, that's the actual render, just the straight render pass that it's made. What you want to do is bring them into the one document. So I'll grab this shadow. Let's just unlock this layer. Is everyone okay with Photoshop? I think you've done that in production art, haven't you?
Oh, just in Digital Toolkit as well.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So this is my shadow, so I'll just hide that. And for the depth, what you want to do is stick that on the alpha. So I just select it all and copy. And so the alpha, so on this main color layer, you go into the channels, and if you make a new layer, that becomes the alpha layer. And then when you paste it, that's there sticking. And so we'll use this later. I'll just go back to RGB and turn off that alpha. We'll use that alpha channel in there later with one of the filter passes to get that to get a bit of depth of field blur, a bit of lens blur. Let's see, at this point, I'd probably increase the shadows. Actually, before I do that, let's just, I was saying the wand tool, so just W and click the magic wand. Because if you've got a solid screen color in ZBrush, as you will by default, it's that easy. So you don't usually need a mask unless you've got something weird going on. I like to do that and then just quickly put in a nice background. Now, even if all you're going to do is go, I actually like the gray background, you should still do this. Oops, the wrong layer. The reason you want to do this is what we'll do on this layer. So this layer is just the render of the model with no background. We'll muck around with the levels a little bit. And if you have all that background in this image, the levels aren't very effective. If you just have this layer, it's kind of nice. So I'll do that now. I think it's Control L is levels. Yep. If you're not familiar with this, basically the easy way to think about it is these spikes, that's your data. That's where all the information is. And so there's a bunch of almost zero data here. And so if I just drag it down, you can see it kind of pops more. And what I might just do is bring the midtones up a little bit. So just get a bit of that color back. So it just causes it to pop and just be a bit stronger and more interesting looking. Of course, this background, you can do anything at all with that. That can be a picture, or I often like to just do a simple gradient of some sort. Just whatever, just get a bit of variety in there. I'll leave that to you. And then I like to do the shadow pass over the top. If you set this to one of these, usually darken or multiply, I think multiply would be a good effect, and full strength is too much opacity. So turn that down to about half. So it's a pretty subtle effect. You can see all it's doing is pushing those shadows a bit further. But that really, really helps bring up that, you know, the mystique of the character and make it look a bit more dynamic and interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I did the levels. pretty much all that's left to do is a bit of blur, so a bit of depth of field. So I'll do that. What I want to do for this one though is do it on the one layer. So if I just select all of these and hit Control E, that just collapses everything into the one layer. Or you can just go flatten, what is it, layer, flatten image. It does the same thing. Or Control E just goes down layers. So now that it's on the one layer, I'm just going to double check I didn't kill my alpha. No, it's still there. So what I should be able to do is go into Filter, Blur, and look for a lens blur. And you want to make sure that the source that's causing the depth map is set to your alpha channel. And then the way this works, if you increase the radius, it'll be really obvious, and then you turn that back. The way this works is where you click on your map becomes the focal point. So if I click on the shoulder here, you can see it's thinking that's in focus and that's becoming out of focus. So if I click on the tip of his nose, that's going to become focused, and then my blur is quite strong.
Ooh,
so it's really cool. I think that's maybe a touch too strong, but it's just sometimes less is more with this stuff. If you just get a really subtle blur effect, it can actually look really good. Like that's super subtle, maybe a touch too subtle. But you want to experiment with it. Like, going really strong definitely has an impact, and that does look pretty cool. So it's up to you to just kind of experiment and find the right setting.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's it. So then I've hit OK, accepted that. So I've got my blur there. And the final thing is I like to crop it. So just figure out what sort of framing I'm going to do to present this. And, you could just go like that, but it's kind of nice to pick your framing size. Crop. Where are we? Crop. Image crop. And one thing I didn't mention was how you get your resolution size. So this is set to, what is it? So those many pixels by those many pixels, because I've cropped it. But the way your document, because by default, especially on those 24-inch monitors at JMC, by default, it's going to be a fairly small document. And so what you'll need to do before you do any of this is something I kind of missed, I should have said to start with. You want to change your document size. So I'll just turn down this render. You really want that pretty low when you're just mucking around with it. Let's just turn that back down to preview. Yep. The document down here, this is your document size, which is related to the resolution of your monitor. So, if you want like a really large image, which is always great, you could just go double. And just be aware what happens. Notice the gray borders here. If I go double, it's going to say, this is undoable, you sure? Yep. I've zoomed right in and I've lost my gray borders. So what I need to do now, and I can't zoom out to get it, what I need to do is come back to the document and use this zoom out button. And so when I click and drag that, that gives me my document back.
Very nice.
Yep. So now this, you can see the resolution here is twice the size it was before. The document's still, like obviously it's in frame, but it's just taken a gigantic document. And just like in Photoshop, when you zoom in and zoom out on a document, it's doing the same thing. We're very much in 2D mode at the moment, and we're just zooming out of a picture. So now when I hit, export document, it's going to be exporting out this, whatever resolution that is, almost 4K. And so that's worth doing, so that when you come back into Photoshop, you've got a nice big image to work with, and you can just shrink it down as you want. Obviously at this point I can say save as, export that as a JPEG, or if it's going to, unfortunately Facebook likes to crunch down images really low quality, there's not much you can do about it. But if you're making a small image that needs to be small, you can easily do that. So that's full size now. So you can change it. It's always nice to go big and then just make it as small as you need it anytime you're working on this sort of thing. Now, one last thing is make sure when you've done this, you set it back to normal, because especially on those JMC computers, on some of them anyway. So this is, I'm in 2D mode. That's also always fun. No, it's not lagging too bad, but sometimes it'll lag.
Little man.
A little man on his shoulder telling him to go on, eat the cake.
Pointing the other one.
Do it. Donuts.
No, it's funny as.
Needs the other one there. Buy the donuts. Just remember to reset this. So, okay, set it back to half, and then You can see my resolution's back to normal, and I just wanted to use my zoom to get my screen size right. And that's it.
Very cool.
So you make a nice render out of Zbrush without having to retopologize, unwrap, and texture inside of Maya, which is not what you want to be doing. Does that make sense for everyone?
Yeah.
I'm gonna just stop recording.
I'll probably forget later. So.
Yeah. Well, I just recorded that, and this seems to be working.